Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jonathan Claudio, and today we will be discussing about the rights and responsibilities of the indigenous peoples. Now, question, bakit meron pang set ng karapatan at mga responsibilidad na para lamang sa mga indigenous peoples? Hindi ba sila kasama? Hindi ba sila kasali sa aren't they subjected to the Article 3 of our Constitution? The answer is yes, they are subjected to the Article 3 of our Constitution, but the Article 3, Section 1 of our Constitution itself says that, quote, "No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall any person be denied the equal protection of the laws." Unquote. This section, this provision in our Constitution is only one sentence, but it consists two parts. The first part is what lawyers call the Due Process Clause, and the second part is what the lawyers call the Equal Protection Clause. And the Equal Protection Clause means that, quote, "All persons subjected to legislation should be treated alike under like circumstances and conditions, both in privileges conferred and liabilities imposed," unquote. But in a more simpler definition of the Equal Protection Clause, Senator Miriam Defensor Santiago said, quote, "Under the Equal Protection Clause, if two people are similarly situated, you must treat them the same way," unquote. But you cannot possibly treat the indigenous peoples on one hand and non-indigenous peoples on the other hand, because they are not similarly situated. They are different from each other. The indigenous peoples have distinct characteristics such as, number one, they identify themselves as indigenous peoples. Number two, there is a historical link with those who inhabited a country or region at the time when the people of different cultures or ethnic origins arrived. Number three, they have a strong link to territories and surrounding natural resources. Number four, they have distinct social, economic, and political systems. Number five, they have a distinct culture, language, and beliefs. Number six, they are marginalized and discriminated against by the state. And number seven, they maintain and develop their ancestral environments and systems as distinct peoples. So those are the distinct characteristics of the indigenous peoples. That is why you cannot possibly treat the indigenous peoples and non-indigenous peoples the same. That is why there is a set of responsibilities and rights for the indigenous peoples that are not granted to non-indigenous peoples. Now, what exactly are the rights and responsibilities that are set only for the indigenous peoples? Well, those rights and responsibilities are provided under the Republic Act 18371, popularly known as the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act of 1997, particularly under Chapter 3, Section 7, Section 8, and Section 9. Let us first begin with the Section 7 of the Chapter 3. It is all about the right to ancestral domains. The right to ancestral domains says that the rights of ownership and possession of ICC/IP to their ancestral domains shall be recognized and protected. Such rights shall include, there are 8 subsections, and I will be reading each and one of them. Subsection A, right of ownership, meaning to say, the indigenous peoples or the indigenous cultural community have the right to own their ancestral domain. And that includes the sacred places, traditional hunting and fishing grounds, and all improvements made by them at any time within the domains. Subsection B, right to develop lands and natural resources. This subsection says that they have the right to use, to utilize, and maximize the land that they have claimed to be their territory, as well as the natural resources in that land. Subsection C, right to stay in the territories. The right to stay in the territory and not to be removed therefrom. No ICC/IP will be relocated without their free and prior informed consent. nor through any means other than the eminent domain. Where relocation is considered necessary as an exceptional measure, such relocation shall take place only with the free and prior informed consent of the ICC/IP concerned, and whenever possible. They shall be guaranteed the right to return to their ancestral domains as soon as the grounds for relocation cease to exist. Meaning to say, hindi mo pwedeng ilipat, o hindi mo pwedeng i-relocate, hindi mo pwedeng tanggalin sa kanilang teritoryo ang mga indigenous peoples o indigenous cultural community unless merong free and prior informed consent. Free and prior informed consent means na nag-gather sila, nag-discuss sila, and they came out with one decision. So, kung hindi nila ginawa yun, walang free and prior informed consent. At hindi mo rin sila pwedeng paalisin unless it is through the power of eminent domain. The power of eminent domain is provided also in the Article 3 of our Constitution, where it is said that, quote, no private property shall be taken for public use without just compensation. That is the provision providing the power of eminent domain. Ngayon, kung sakali man na maidipat mo sila, ma-relocate mo sila dahil meron silang free and prior informed consent or ginamit mo yung power of eminent domain, then it is said that they shall be guaranteed the right to return to their ancestral domains as soon as the grounds for relocation cease to exist. For example, nirelocate mo sila for the purpose of evacuation kasi magkakaroon ng malakas na bagyo, malakas na lindol doon sa kanilang community. Then, kapag tapos na yung catastrophe, kapag tapos na yung sakuna na yon, then they have the right to return to their ancestral domain. Now, let's move on to subsection D. Right in case of displacement. In case displacement occurs as a result of natural catastrophes, the state shall endeavor to resettle the displaced ICC/IP in suitable areas where they can have a temporary life support system. Meaning to say, kung pala magkaroon ng lindol, ng baha, ng kung ano mang sakuna, at i-relocate mo itong mga indigenous cultural community o mga indigenous people, yung state ay may pananagutan o may responsibilidad na mag-provide sa kanila ng temporary life support system. It can be through agriculture or pwede magbigay sila ng supply such as medical and food supply. Now, provided that the displaced ICC/IP shall have the right to return to their abandoned lands until such time that the normalcy and safety of such lands shall be determined. Furthermore, that should their ancestral domain cease to exist and normalcy and safety for the previous settlement are not possible, displaced ICC/IP shall enjoy security of tenure over lands of which they have been resettled. Ibig sabihin, may karapatan silang bumalik. Pero, kung hindi na sila makakabalik, like for example, masyadong sinira ng lindol o ng landslide yung kanilang ancestral domain, then they should be given the right to stay in wherever they have been relocated. That is what subsection D is about. Now, let's proceed to subsection E. Right to regulate entry of migrants. Right to regulate the entry of migrant settlers and organizations into the domains. Meaning to say, kung halimbawa magkakaroon ng mga tao na or organization na pupunta doon sa kanilang teritoryo, may karapatan sila para i-regulate yung mga migrants na yon. Now, let's proceed to subsection F. Right to safe and clean air and water. For this purpose, the ICC/IP shall have access to integrated system for the management of their inland waters and airspace. Meaning to say, kailangan pala responsibilidad din ng gobyerno o ng estado na magbigay ng malinis at safe na inumin at ng safe na hangin sa mga indigenous peoples. Subsection G. Right to claim parts of the reservation. The right to claim parts of ancestral domains which have been reserved for various purposes except those reserved and intended for common public welfare and services. Now, let's say na merong community. So, diyan merong parts na bakante pa. Let's say bakanting lote. Now, they have the right to claim or to reserve those lands except kung yung land na yon ay napag-usapan na para maging for example, a school or planta ng tubig or planta ng kuryente, because that will fall under the intended for common public welfare and service. So, hindi na nila pwedeng i-claim yun. Hindi na nila pwedeng angkinin yung part ng reservation na yon. Now, moving on to subsection H, right to resolve conflict. You know, the indigenous cultural communities or the indigenous peoples have their political structure called the Indigenous Peoples Political Structure. Now, with their own political structure, they have the right to resolve the conflict within their territory. But in case na hindi ma-resolve yung conflict na yun within, hindi ma-resolve ng kanilang political structure yung conflict na yun, then that is the time when they should render assistance to the court of justice or to the court of law. Now, those are the rights of the indigenous peoples to their ancestral domain. Now, let us move on to section 8, which is the rights to ancestral lands. It is said that the right of ownership and possession of the ICC/IP to their ancestral lands shall be recognized and protected. There are two subsections in this section, subsection A and subsection B. Subsection A is about the right to transfer land or property. It is said that, quote, such right shall include the right to transfer land or property rights to or among members of the same ICC/IP, subject to customary laws and traditions of community concerned. Ngayon, meron silang karapatan na i-transfer or ibenta yung kanilang mga ari-arian o yung kanilang mga lupain sa same sa isang member ng same ICC or IP. For example, yung mga AITA, meron silang karapatan na isalin o i-transfer yung lupa nila sa isa pang member ng AITA. That is what this subsection A is about. Now, moving on to subsection B, right to redemption. In cases where it is shown that the transfer of land/property rights by virtue of any agreement or device to a non-member of the concerned ICC/IP is tainted by the vitiated consent of the ICC/IP or is mistransferred for unconscionable consideration or price, the transfer or the ICC, yung nagbenta, shall have the right to redeem the same within a period of not exceeding to 15 years from the date of transfer. Ngayon, kung lumalabas na niloko pala yung ICC or yung nagbenta, for example, ako, hindi ako member ng AITA, pero bumili ako ng lupa ng AITA. Pagkatapos niloko ko pala siya, masyadong mababa yung pagkakabili ko sa lupain niya, then pwede niyang the AITA or the one who sold me the land have the right to redeem the land. But if he or she is going to file a case, then it should not exceed 15 years because, for example, yung bentahan ay naganap noong 2010, then pwede pa niya akong habulin hanggang 2025. But pagka umabot na yung 2026, then hindi na siya pwedeng umapila, hindi na niya mababawi yung lupang ibinenta niya. So that is what the right to redemption is about. Now, those are the rights of the indigenous peoples provided under the Chapter 3, Sections 7 and Section 8. Now, let us move on to the responsibilities of the indigenous peoples. Ano nga ba ang mga responsibilidad ng mga indigenous peoples? Number 1, maintain ecological balance. To preserve, restore, and maintain a balanced ecology in the ancestral domain by protecting the flora and fauna, watershed areas, and other reserves. Meaning to say, kailangan nilang protektahan at i-restore anuman yung masisira sa mga nabanggit na ecology. Meaning to say, kailangan ma-maintain nila kung anuman yung kalikasan na tinitirahan nila. Subsection B, restore denuded areas. To actively initiate, undertake, and participate in the reforestation of denuded areas and other development programs and projects subject to just and reasonable remuneration. Ibig sabihin, kung halimbawa may part ng kagubatan ng forest na nakalbo o naputulan ng maraming puno for any reason, then they have the responsibility na magtanim ulit ng puno to restore that denuded area. Yun ang ibig sabihin itong subsection B of the section 9. And finally, the last subsection under section 9, subsection C, observe laws. To observe and comply with the provisions of this act and the rules and regulations for its effective implementation. Meaning to say, to be effectively implemented, kailangan sumunod din yung mga indigenous peoples sa provision ng act na to. Kagaya halimbawa nitong mga responsibilidad. Kailangan nagampanan nila ang mga responsibilidad na ito, kailangan nilang sundin kung ano man yung mga provision sa batas na ito nang sa gayon ay maging effective ang implementation ng Republic Act 8371. Now, those are the rights and responsibilities of indigenous peoples under the Republic Act 8371, otherwise known as the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act of 1997. Now, I will be linking down some questions. It is optional if you want to answer it or not, but if it is required by the subject, then you should take that simple assessment. So, thank you all for listening. God bless you and God bless the Philippines.